Hi, folks. This is just a bit of storytelling. I wanted to share something that happened, which was horrible at the time, but quite funny in retrospect. And yeah, I suppose I wanted to talk about despair a little bit. He says with a big smile on his face. Despair. Despair and liberation, I think, are inextricably linked. At least that was my experience during this process. Some people might, you know, have a moment of clarity, and there's no dark night of the soul. There's no, no problem. I mean, if that's the case, cool. But most people, I think, hit a sort of before liberation, hit a point of rock bottom, and I did have that. I will say that it didn't last. It was very short lived, and I'll talk about that. I'll talk about how it came about. So sorry, I just need to stretch my jaw there. I During this process, I had the sort of the big Kundalini reveal, or beginnings of the first time I noticed. I think that the Kundalini had been sort of, or the loss of the sense of self had been coming. It'd been a long time coming. I was starting to do random things like just crying on the tube, and just this sort of cathartic, emotional, almost like mourning the self that I wasn't anymore, and it was kind of dying. But during that phase, that wasn't problematic. It was cathartic, if anything. So this something was going on. Like but I've been like that through all my life. I've sort of shed many a skin and had moments of crying and turmoil, and then a new sort of lease of life. So I guess Kundalini is an extension of that. But so all that was going on, and then at one point I remember being in a bar with my friends, and this is when I first realised that some dramatic shift had happened, because I just couldn't find myself, and I was in this pub, and it was great, and I was seeing friends after work, and as I was talking, just all self-consciousness had just gone, and there was just this ease, this flow, and I just wasn't there anymore. And it wasn't like there was no specialness. It wasn't like everything was lit up like a Christmas tree, and it wasn't like wow. But there was just like an ease, and I just thought, well, this is weird, and like yeah, and I suddenly got what everyone was talking about, oh, I'm just not here. And the thought even came into my head. I'm like, I'm dead. I've gone. I'm gone. I'm like, I'm dead. I don't mean that everything was full of life, but that's just what came into my mind, because I just couldn't. Yeah, something had shifted, and so that was good. So that's when I started to notice a change, and then the Kundalini kind of became much more intense, and then there was a whole real magical phase which hasn't really ended, and I've just sort of given it a bit of a rest, because I got a little bit too into it, and I guess there was still seeking, even though there was been a massive shift. Seeking kind of has a momentum, I think, and I was still in that momentum, and I was reading about Aleister Crowley and books, and I had all this Egyptian symbolism and stuff like that going on, and I was getting into it a bit too intensely. I was like, I got to figure out all the clues, and the symbol was taking me to that symbol, and then I would see the same symbol in another book. I was like, I must read that book because of the connection. It was really interesting, but it was getting quite full on, and I guess there was still at that time this notion that there was something coming, that I was going to get somewhere, even though the shift was obviously didn't. Anyway, so I was gonna, this sort of trail of symbols and clues seemed to lead me to this online Zoom meeting by a non-duality speaker, and I saw an email that said it said they'd got the time wrong for the UK and London, and it said correction, time is now and that was like in 10 minutes. So I was like, oh well, I'll do that, because it seems to be all happening naturally. And just before that, I'd been lying on the floor, sawing at my head vigorously, and I had blood all over my head. I was at the time I had other sort of meridian. I had so now at the moment you can't see very clearly now. It's calmed down, I think, because I've got a bit of a wound and it's taking a bit of a rest so that this heals. But at the time, I was soaring for I don't know how long, and I had not only these 2 lines here, but like another line with a little bit of blood was coming from each line, and so the top of my head was just red, and I was kind of in a sort of right state, and I joined this meeting with a head full of blood. I just thought, I don't know. I was in a strange place at the time. I don't know why. I didn't want to rub it off, and I just thought, this is me. This is who I am. I'm the guy with blood on his face. Like, I don't care, something like that. But I thought that if I joined this Zoom meeting, I thought that this was going to be people welcoming, the non-duality crowd, welcoming me into the world of enlightenment. I thought I was going to, log on and have people high five me, and like I felt like and this is so, egotistical, but I thought that everyone was going to like cheer or something, or be like, welcome Hamish, or we are the chosen ones, or you've made it, welcome to the non-duality crowd, and high fives all around, and like we've been watching you, and following your progress, we knew you were close, this, I mean, real ego trip, coming from someone who had a sense of loss of self. This seems very bizarre, and but that's what was happening, and then I got online, and of course it was not the case at all, and it's just a bunch of people trying to figure out the message as normal, and I'm just there with blood on my head, and I was just kind of like, oh. And then I started shaking. The kundalini at that point was going into my skull a lot, and I was just kind of like, and I turned off my video at this point because I must have been freaking a few people out, and that's when the despair kicked in, and that's when, for the first time, I've been listening to non-duality for about 3 years, maybe, radical non-duality, and for the first time, I felt the message just punch me in the gut. I was like, oh fuck, and I just hit rock bottom, and I was like, this isn't going anywhere, man. There's nowhere to go. And that was really, really, really horrible. And I just kind of, I turned my video off, and I could still hear the speakers talking, but I wasn't listening anymore. And I was just sort of staring into my bed covers, just staring into space. And yeah, absolute despair. Funny thing about that, though, is that at the same time as the despair, a few minutes into sort of sitting there was just this feeling of relief at the same time. And the relief was this kind of like, oh, well, at least I don't have to do it anymore. I don't have to try anymore. It's all over. So it was this really strange combination, complete despair intertwined with relief. Very odd. But that's the liberation. It's the sense of self just finally hitting a wall. Like, it tried everything. It pulled out all the tricks. It did everything it could to survive. And it at some point it was like, nah, this ain't going anywhere, man. This is the end. So I guess you would say that was a dark night of the soul moment, but it didn't last. I would say it was more like a dark 20 minutes of the soul. Like, I was quite lucky in that sense. This wasn't prolonged for days. In fact, this happened in the evening. So after I'd been sitting there like that for a while, I would just kind of turn my light off and put my covers on. I was like, oh, and then the next day, I don't remember feeling anything. I don't remember waking up feeling particularly depressed or particularly elated, but I was just, life goes on, and that was the liberation. Like, I mean, I this process, whatever's happening, is ongoing. So there can be all sorts of moments of depression and despair that arise, but that did seem to be a finality there, from what I can tell. But so the despair and the liberation are really. As far as I'm concerned, they're one, And the funny thing about that moment of despair, where I was just staring, my thought processes died down because there's no fucking point in thinking anymore, there's no solution anymore. So everything kind of just came to a halt, and I was just staring at my bed sheets like that, and I realized now that was kind of like a meditative state. That's what people do when they meditate. They just sit, and there's not much going on. It's just a sitting, and I was just sitting, and I was got like, and so despair can be quite peaceful. You don't hear that very often, but an absolute state of despair, not that different from a total state of meditation. It's the giving up of it's the end of trying, the end of striving. But of course, you can't try to reach the end of trying. That's not going to work. And so that's why I think this is kind of like a karmic thing, because if there's no self, there's nothing you can do, and there never was, then no one was doing any of it ever, then no one's in charge. So in that sense, it's kind of, you can kind of, if that seed, there's kind of been like a relaxation in the body. But of course that can't be seen by the mind, because the mind just deals in concepts. So it will hear the concept and go, oh, and just try and work it out, and all these mental processes going on, but it can't reach this, because it has to be heard in the body. And I think that's what happened during this Zoom meeting. Like, for 3 years, I've been hearing it mentally, and there'd been a physical resonance. I mean, there has to be, otherwise you wouldn't listen to it. If you're listening to non-duality for 3 years and trying to understand, you fucking drive yourself crazy. There's a sort of relaxation. There was always a relaxation while I listened to it, and I guess a kind of love. But it's when the body hears it, that's when the shift happens, I think. And I felt like, because the body has its own intelligence, like the mind's just kind of noise a lot of the time. It's kind of like a tool, you can use it, but we put so much emphasis on the mind, figuring stuff out. But the body is what's intelligent, and the mind is a part of that. The mind isn't controlling the body, and I think that's what kind of Kundalini is. It's the body just freeing itself from the grips of a fucked up mind. It's just like, will you fucking get out of here? Just let me be, for the love of fuck. So I think that's what's happened, and my body heard it. My body realized there was nowhere to go. My body realized that. And again, not obviously it's not an intellectual realization. But it's deeper than that. It's more intense. And the funny thing about when this happened, obviously the Kundalini and the Kriya had already started pretty, and that was pretty full on. And as I was in that moment of despair, just staring, the Kundalini put one hand on my belly and the other on my chest, and just started doing that, like trying to console me. It didn't help, because at that point, I was in such a state of despair. I think that even if Jesus had come down and gone, "Don't worry, I will save you now," I think I'd have just been, "Nah, man, there's nothing you can do to help me right now." Like, I wouldn't even have looked up. I was like, "Hi, Jesus." Yeah, it was rough. And so this energy is just kind of doing this. And it was kind of creepy, and there was, despite the despair, there was still a sense of like, what the fuck is this, because I was kind of like, it didn't help and it didn't cheer me up, but I suppose I kind of appreciated it. But it was just weird, because it's like, I don't know who's doing it, so I'm just kind of like, this is creepy, it's like, it was like it was kind of going like, "Don't worry, I'll take care of you." And I'm like, I don't know who you are. This is weird. Absolutely batshit crazy, all of this stuff. So that's it, really. I just wanted to describe that moment, just because I thought it was funny in retrospect / pretty harsh. But yeah, I was lucky. It didn't, in the sense that it was short-lived moment of, there were sort of little moments of despair before that, little sort of mini deaths where the body would just seem to die, and then I'd come to, and just I had moments where the whole body, like almost like the strings that are pulling you up, would just cut, and I just felt, and this happened a few times, sometimes more pronounced than others, and the body would just, and to any onlooker, it would look like I died. If anyone had seen me, they'd have called an ambulance, probably. And then a few minutes later, we'll just be like, I don't know what that was about. So that happened quite a lot. thought I was going to say something else. But oh yes, but there were moments of little moments of despair, little deaths leading up to it, and things like that. But and there could be more to come. I've no idea. I've no idea.